My daughter-in-law said that her parents would not come to the wedding. Better this way, less shame. I went to look for them on my own. When I found them, they told me a secret that sent a chill down my spine. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you are seeing me so I can see how far my story has traveled. My name is Deborah, and for 53 years I have trusted my maternal instinct. That same instinct that woke me up when my son had a fever as a baby, that alerted me when something was not going well at school, now shouted to me that something was terribly wrong with Jessica, the woman who would marry my Michael in 3 weeks. It all started on a Tuesday afternoon when I was helping to organize the last details of the wedding. Jessica and I were sitting in my kitchen, surrounded by guest lists, flower samples, and thank you cards. The October sun streamed through the window, creating an atmosphere that should have been perfect for planning the most important day of my son's life. "Deborah, there is something I need to tell you," said Jessica, playing nervously with her engagement ring. Her voice had that tone I had already learned to recognize, that false sweetness she used when she wanted to get her way. "What's wrong, dear?" I asked her, although something in my stomach was already tightening. "My parents won't be able to come to the wedding." Her eyes did not meet mine when she said it. Instead, she focused on folding and unfolding a napkin she had in her hands. I was silent for a moment, processing what I had just heard. During the 8 months I had known Jessica, every time I asked her about her family, she changed the subject or gave vague answers. She said that her parents were complicated or that they had irreconcilable differences with her. "Are they sick?" I asked, trying to keep my voice neutral. "No, that's not it." Jessica sighed dramatically, as if she were the victim of a great injustice. "They simply decided that they did not want to be part of my life. They told me that they did not care about my wedding." Something about the way she said it bothered me deeply. It was not sadness I heard in her voice. It was almost relief, as if she was happy they were not coming. "Jessica, that seems very strange to me. What parents would not want to be at their daughter's wedding?" She tensed visibly. "Parents like mine. Believe me, Deborah, it's better this way. Less drama, less complications. Michael and I can enjoy our special day without worrying about them." The way she pronounced "our special day" sounded rehearsed to me, as if she had practiced that answer. I got up to serve more coffee. I needed a moment to process what I was feeling. "Does Michael know this?" I asked as I filled our cups. "Of course he does. He fully understands my decision." But when I returned to the table, I noticed something in her eyes. A fleeting expression that I could not fully identify, but that was definitely not that of a sad bride whose parents would not be at her wedding. That night, when Michael came to dinner as he always did on Tuesdays, I decided to address the issue with him. My son looked tired after a long day at his dental office, but as always, he greeted me with that warm hug that had been our tradition since he was little. "Michael, Jessica told me about her parents today," I said, while serving his favorite dish, spinach lasagna. He became rigid immediately. "What did she tell you?" "That they are not coming to the wedding." "That's strange, son. Have you met them?" Michael avoided my gaze, focusing on cutting his lasagna with more precision than necessary. "Mom, it's complicated. Jessica has a difficult relationship with them. But have you met them? Have you spoken to them, at least on the phone?" "No, and I don't want to pressure Jessica about that. She asked me to respect her decision, and that's what I'm going to do." The way he said it worried me even more. My son had always been curious. He asked questions. He wanted to meet the families of his previous girlfriends. It was strange that he would simply agree not to meet the parents of the woman he was going to marry. "Michael, doesn't it seem strange to you that in 8 months you have never spoken to them? You don't even know what their names are." "Yes, I know what their names are," he answered defensively. "Their names are Robert and Patricia Collins." "And where do they live?" A very long pause. "Somewhere in Minnesota, I think." He thought. My son didn't even know in what state the parents of his future wife were living. That was not normal. "Son, don't you think you should meet them before you marry their daughter?" Michael left his fork on the plate and looked at me with an expression I had never seen before. It was as if he were repeating words that someone else had put in his mouth. "Mum, not all families are like ours. Some people have painful stories that they prefer to leave in the past. Jessica asked me not to ask questions about her parents, and I respect that." There was that phrase again, Jessica asked me. During the last few months, I had noticed that Michael used that expression a lot. Jessica asked me not to go out so much with my friends. Jessica asked me not to work so late. Jessica asked me not to come to your house so much. That night, after Michael left, I stayed awake until very late, tossing and turning in bed. There was something deeply wrong with this whole situation. As a mother, I had learned to trust those signals my intuition sent me, and at that moment, all those signals were telling me that there was something Jessica didn't want us to know. The next day, I decided to do something I never thought I would do: investigate my son's future wife. I started with the basics. I searched the internet for Robert Collins, Minnesota, and Patricia Collins, Minnesota. But there were too many results. I needed more specific information. During lunch, I called Jessica with the excuse of talking about flowers. "Dear Jessica, could you give me the full names of your parents for the guest list? Even if they don't come, I would like to send them a thank you card for raising you so well." There was a very long pause on the other side of the line. "Deborah, I really don't think it's necessary. As I told you, they don't want to be part of this." "I understand, but as your mother-in-law, I feel it's the right thing to do. I just need their full names and maybe their address." "I don't have their current address," she replied quickly. "They moved recently and didn't give me the new one." Another lie. I could feel it in my soul. What parents move without giving their daughter their new address? "Well, and their full names then?" "Robert James Collins and Patricia Ann Collins," she replied, but her voice sounded tense. That afternoon, armed with the full names, I spent hours searching the internet. Finally, I found something that made my blood run cold. Robert James Collins and Patricia Ann Collins lived in Minneapolis, Minnesota, and according to public records, they had a daughter named Jessica Michelle Collins. But what shocked me was not finding them. It was discovering that they had a publicly listed phone number. If Jessica really had no contact with them, why would they still have the same phone number after all these years? That night, with trembling hands, I dialed the number. A kind female voice answered on the third ring. "Hello? Are you Patricia Collins?" "Yes, who is this?" I took a deep breath. "My name is Deborah Miller. I am Michael's mother, the fiancé of your daughter, Jessica." The silence that followed was deafening. "Are you Jessica's fiancé's mother?" Patricia Collins' voice on the other side of the line was full of an emotion I couldn't immediately identify. It wasn't joy, but it wasn't indifference either. It was something deeper, more painful. "Yes," I answered, feeling my heart beating so fast I was sure she could hear it through the phone. "Jessica told me that you could not come to the wedding because, well, because you did not want to be part of her life." The silence that followed lasted an eternity. I could hear Patricia breathe deeply, as if she were trying to decide what to say. "Mrs. Miller," she finally spoke, and her voice was broken. "Could we speak in person?" There are things you need to know about our daughter. The words hit me like a punch in the stomach. The way she said, "There are things you need to know," confirmed that my worst fears were about to come true. "What kind of things?" I asked, although part of me didn't want to hear the answer. "It is not something I can say over the phone. Would it be possible for you to come to Minneapolis? Or could we go there? This is very important." We agreed to meet that weekend. I told them I would go to Minneapolis, that I needed to make this trip alone. I didn't tell Michael anything. Something told me that what I was about to discover would change everything, and I needed to be prepared before involving my son. On Friday morning, I told Michael I was going to visit my sister in Madison, Wisconsin for the weekend. Technically, it was not a complete lie, since my sister Carol lived there, but it was definitely not the whole truth. "Do you want Jessica and I to take you to the airport?" Michael offered while we were having breakfast. "No, dear. I've already hired a service. You two have a lot to do for the wedding." Jessica, who was sitting next to him drinking her coffee, looked at me with a strange expression when I mentioned Wisconsin. For a second, I saw something similar to panic cross her eyes, but it faded so quickly that I almost thought I had imagined it. "Madison?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "How nice. Has your sister lived there for a long time?" "About 15 years, I replied, carefully observing her reaction. "I have never been to that part of Wisconsin," she said, but something in her tone made me think she was lying again. The flight to Minneapolis was turbulent, but not as much as my thoughts. During the 3-hour trip, I could not stop wondering what was so terrible that Jessica's parents needed to tell me in person. I had considered the possibility that it was an exaggeration, that perhaps it was just normal family differences, but the urgency in Patricia's voice told me it was something much more serious. Patricia and Robert Collins picked me up at the airport. I recognized them immediately because Jessica had inherited her mother's green eyes and her father's facial structure. But what struck me most was seeing the deep sadness that both had on their faces. It was not the kind of temporary sadness that comes with everyday problems. It was the kind of sadness that settles in the soul when you have lost something or someone forever. Patricia hugged me as if she had known me all my life. "Thank you for coming, Deborah. I know this must be very confusing for you." Robert took my suitcase without saying much, but I could see in his eyes the same sadness his wife was carrying. On the way to their home, we talked about trivial things: the weather, the flight, the city, but I could feel the tension in the air, as if we were all postponing a conversation that no one wanted to have, but that was absolutely necessary. Their house was modest but warm, full of family photographs. While Patricia was making coffee, I looked at the photos in the living room. There were many of Jessica when she was a child, on birthdays, graduations, family vacations. It looked like a normal and happy family, but I noticed something disturbing. All of Jessica's photos ended when she was approximately 23 years old. After that age, it was as if she had disappeared from their family history. "Those are the last photos we have of her," Robert said, noticing what I was observing. "Since then, we have known practically nothing about her life." "When was the last time you spoke to her?" I asked, feeling a knot forming in my throat. 5 years ago, Patricia replied, coming back with a coffee tray. When she told us she never wanted to see us again, I sat on the couch, trying to process what I had just heard. What happened 5 years ago? Patricia and Robert looked at each other as if deciding who should tell the story. Finally, Patricia spoke. "Deborah, what we are going to tell you is going to be very difficult to hear, but you need to know the truth about our daughter before your son makes the same mistake that other good men made before him." My heart stopped. "What do you mean by other men?" Robert leaned forward, his hands intertwined in front of him. Jessica has been engaged 4 times before, Mrs. Miller. 4 times. The air escaped my lungs. 4 times? The first time she was 21 years old, Patricia continued. He was a wonderful boy named David. She completely destroyed him. She left him 2 weeks before the wedding, after he had spent all his savings on the ceremony. But that could be wedding nerves, I said weakly, trying to find a rational explanation. The second was James, said Robert. That was 8 years ago. Jessica told him she was pregnant to get married faster. After the engagement, she lost the baby that never existed. I felt as if I had been slapped. Are you sure about that? The doctor confirmed to us that she had never been pregnant when James called us asking what had happened, Patricia replied with a broken voice. That poor man was devastated. He had been so excited to be a father. The third was Mark, Robert continued. That was 6 years ago. Jessica convinced him to buy a house that he could not afford, telling him she had saved money to help with the payments. After the engagement, she disappeared with $30,000 that he had given her for joint investments. My hand trembled so much that I had to leave the cup of coffee on the table. And the fourth? Patricia wiped away a tear that had begun to roll down her cheek. The fourth was 5 years ago. His name was Brian. He was a doctor, like your son, an incredibly good and gentle man. What happened to him? The silence that followed was so heavy I felt as if I was drowning. Patricia and Robert looked at each other again, and I could see this was the most painful memory of all. Brian tried to commit suicide 3 days before the wedding, said Robert finally, his voice barely audible. The world stopped. I literally felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. What? I whispered. Jessica had been manipulating him psychologically for months, explained Patricia. She isolated him from his family, from his friends. She convinced him that no one loved him except her, that his family hated him, that he was a failure as a doctor. By the time we realized what was happening, Brian was no longer the same man we had known. The day he came to our house asking for help, we didn't recognize him, Robert continued. He had lost about 20 pounds. He hadn't slept for weeks. He was completely emotionally broken. He told us that Jessica had told him that if he did not marry her, she would kill herself. But she had also told him that if he married her, he would ruin his life forever. It was a perfect emotional blackmail, added Patricia. No matter what he decided, it would be his fault. What did you do? I asked, although I feared the answer. We called Jessica and told her we knew what she was doing. We told her that if she did not leave Brian alone, we would tell the police and his medical board, said Robert. That was the last time we spoke to our daughter. And Brian? He survived, thank God, answered Patricia. He's okay now. He married a wonderful woman last year and they have a baby, but it took years to help him heal from what Jessica did to him. I sat in silence, processing everything I had just heard. Everything I thought I knew about Jessica, about my future daughter-in-law, had been a lie. My son was about to marry a woman who had destroyed the lives of 4 men before him. Why didn't you contact us before? I finally asked. Because we didn't know you existed, answered Patricia. Jessica never told us she was dating someone, much less that she was getting married. We found out because my sister saw the engagement announcement in your local newspaper. She recognized Jessica's name and called us. We have been trying to find a way to contact you without looking crazy or vengeful, added Robert. We know how all this must sound. But when you called us, said Patricia, we knew that God had given us an opportunity to prevent another good man from suffering what the others did. I got up from the sofa, feeling as if my legs were collapsing. I need to think about all this. Of course, said Patricia, getting up as well. But Mrs. Miller, there is something else you need to know. My heart sank even more. What else? Brian was not the only one who tried to hurt himself. David, the first, also had suicidal thoughts after Jessica left him. And Mark lost his house and declared bankruptcy. You are saying that my son could... I couldn't finish the question. We are saying that your son is in danger, answered Robert firmly. And based on what we have observed in the past, that danger increases the closer the wedding date is. That night, I could not sleep a minute. I lay in the guest room of the Collinses, looking at the ceiling, processing everything I had heard. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Michael's face, his innocent smile when he spoke of Jessica, the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned the wedding. My son had no idea what was coming. At 6 a.m, I got up and found Patricia in the kitchen, already dressed and making coffee. By the way she looked at me, I knew she hadn't slept either. Are you okay, Deborah? She asked me, pouring me a cup. No, I answered honestly. Nothing is okay. My son is getting married in 2 weeks to a woman who has apparently destroyed the lives of 4 men. How can anything be okay? Patricia sat down in front of me, her hands wrapping her own cup, as if she needed the heat to give herself courage. There are more things you need to know, she said softly. Last night we didn't tell you everything, because it had already been too much for one day. I felt like a cold fist was squeezing my stomach. What else? Robert is trying to contact the other men, Jessica's ex-fiancés. We want you to talk to them, to listen to their stories directly. Are they willing to talk to me? Brian is. In fact, when Robert explained the situation to him last night, he offered to fly here today. He says he can't let another man go through what he went through. 3 hours later, I was sitting in the living room waiting for Brian to arrive. Patricia had shown me pictures of him before and after his relationship with Jessica. The difference was devastating. In the pictures from before, he looked healthy, smiling, full of life. In the pictures from after, taken by Robert when Brian came to ask for help, he looked like a ghost of himself. When Brian arrived, I immediately understood why Jessica had chosen him. He was handsome, successful, and had that kindness in his eyes that my Michael also had. The kind of man who saw the best in people, who trusted easily, who loved deeply. Mrs. Miller, he said to me, holding my hand tightly, thank you for being here. I know this can't be easy for you. Thank you for coming, Brian. I need to understand what this woman did to protect my son. Brian sat down in front of me, took a deep breath, and began to speak. At first, Jessica was perfect, too perfect. But I was so in love that I didn't see the alarm bells. She was sweet, attentive, seemed to understand me better than anyone. She made me feel like the most special man in the world. When did things start to change? Gradually. So gradually that I didn't realize until it was too late. She began with small comments about my family. Nothing too direct, just apparently innocent observations. Did you notice how your sister always interrupts you when you speak? Or how your mother is always so critical of you? My stomach tensed. I remembered every time Michael had recently come home and seemed to be analyzing our conversations in a different way, as if he were seeing defects he had never noticed before. Then she began with my friends, continued Brian. She told me she had heard Tom speaking ill of me at a party, or that Sarah had made a derogatory comment about my work. She always had proof. She had always overheard something. And you believed her? Completely. Because she mixed lies with half-truths. Tom did make some comments about my work schedule, but Jessica had distorted them to make them sound malicious. Sarah did joke about my obsession with work, but Jessica convinced me she was actually insulting me. Patricia brought me more coffee while Brian continued his story. I could see the pain in his eyes as he remembered those months. By the time I realized what was happening, I had already lost most of my friends. My family thought I had become distant and arrogant, and Jessica was the only person in my life who understood and supported me. How was she with you when you were alone? Incredible, affectionate, understanding. She made me feel like I was her hero, but she also began to depend more and more emotionally on me. If I arrived late from the hospital, she cried because she thought I didn't love her anymore. If I didn't answer the phone immediately, she had panic attacks, thinking something had happened to me. That sounds intense. It was exhausting, but she had convinced me that that was true love, that no one else would love me as intensely as she did. She said her ex-boyfriends had not known how to appreciate her love, that they had hurt her so much that now she was afraid to trust again. Brian stopped for a moment, running his hands through his hair. The most twisted part is that she made me feel privileged for being the only one she trusted, as if it were my responsibility to heal all the wounds that others had caused her. When did you realize that something was wrong? 3 months before the wedding. My sister confronted me after I cancelled another family dinner. She told me she didn't recognize me, that I had changed completely. That night, instead of defending Jessica as I always did, I began to wonder if she was right. What did you do? I began to observe more carefully and realized that every time Jessica told me about something bad someone had said about me, there were never witnesses. She had always been alone when she heard it. When I began to verify her stories with the people involved, I discovered that most of the things she had told me were direct exaggerations or lies. Robert joined us at that moment, sitting next to his wife. Tell her about the threats, Brian. Brian became visibly tense. When I confronted Jessica about the lies, she first denied everything. Then she admitted something, but she said she had done them because she loved me so much that she couldn't bear to see other people hurting me. And what did you do? I told her that we needed couples therapy, that this was not healthy. That's when the threats began. What kind of threats? First, they were subtle, comments about how depressed she would feel if I left her, about how she couldn't live without me. Then they became more direct. She said that if I left her and acted like everyone else, she wouldn't have a reason to live. I felt a chill run through my spine. But the most diabolical thing, continued Brian, was that she also threatened me indirectly. She said things like, "If you leave me, I'll tell everyone the truth about you," although she never specified what truth that was, or "No one else will love you after what you've done," although I hadn't done anything wrong. It was pure emotional blackmail, Patricia added. But it worked because Brian is a good man who didn't want to hurt anyone. Exactly. I was trapped. If I stayed with her, I knew I would be emotionally destroyed. But if I left her, she had convinced me that her death would be my fault. What happened the night you... I couldn't finish the question. The night I tried to kill myself, Brian said, completing the sentence for me. It had been a particularly difficult week. Jessica had had 3 crises that week. One because she saw my ex-girlfriend in the supermarket and was convinced I still had feelings for her. Another because my mother hadn't invited her to a family lunch. And the third because I arrived 15 minutes late from the hospital. Each crisis lasted hours. She cried, screamed, accused me of not loving her, threatened to kill herself. To calm her down, I had to comfort her, assure her I loved her more than anything in the world, promise her I would never leave her. That particular night, she told me she had decided to cancel the wedding because, obviously, I didn't love her enough. When I asked her why she thought that, she told me she had seen how I looked at the waitress in the restaurant where we had dined. Brian stopped, breathing deeply before continuing. I didn't even remember looking at any waitress, but Jessica was so convinced, so hurt, that I began to doubt myself. Maybe I did look at her. Maybe I was a bad boyfriend. Maybe I was hurting her without realizing it. That night, after 4 hours of trying to convince her that I loved her, of apologizing for something I wasn't sure I had done, I went to my apartment, completely emotionally exhausted. And that was when I realized I couldn't take it anymore. But I also realized I couldn't leave her, because then her death would be my fault. In my broken mind, the only way out was for me to disappear first. The silence in the room was so dense I could feel it pressing against my chest. Fortunately, Brian continued, I called Robert before doing something irreversible, and he helped me see that everything Jessica had made me believe about myself and the situation were lies. How are you now? I asked. Fine, really fine. I'm married to an incredible woman who loves me in a healthy way. We have a 6-month-old baby, but it took me 2 years of therapy to get here. Brian leaned forward, looking me straight in the eye. Mrs. Miller, your son is in real danger. Jessica won't stop until she has him completely isolated and dependent on her. And when he tries to resist or seek help, she will make him feel that anything bad that happens is his fault. What can I do? How can I protect him without it seeming like I'm trying to sabotage his happiness? That's the million-dollar question, answered Robert. Because if you tell him directly what we've discovered, Jessica will convince him you're jealous, that you're trying to destroy your relationship because you can't stand seeing him happy. She's already started planting those seeds, added Patricia. According to what you told us last night, Michael is already visiting you less frequently and is defending Jessica when you ask legitimate questions. So what do you suggest? Brian smiled for the first time since he arrived. I have an idea, but it will require you to trust us and be willing to act in a way that might seem a little unconventional. My maternal instinct was screaming for me to do whatever was necessary to protect my son. Tell me what you need me to do. The plan that Brian proposed was risky, but after hearing everything Jessica had done to the previous men, I knew I had no choice. The idea was simple in theory, but complicated in execution. We needed Michael to see Jessica's true character for himself, without it seeming like we were manipulating the situation. The problem, Brian explained while we were having coffee in the Collins kitchen that morning, is that Jessica is extremely intelligent. She knows how to behave when there are witnesses. With me, she was a public angel and a private demon. So how can we expose her? I asked. By creating situations where she feels her control is being threatened. When Jessica feels cornered, her mask falls off. But it has to be something natural, something that doesn't make her suspect it's a trap. Robert joined the conversation, bringing a folder full of documents. We've been thinking about this all night, he said, sitting next to us. And we believe we have a strategy that could work. For the next 3 hours, we planned every detail. It was a plan that required perfect timing and a convincing performance on my part. But more than that, it required me to be willing to see my son potentially hurt in the short term to save him from something much worse in the long term. The return flight home was agonizing, not only because I knew what was waiting for me, but because every mile that brought me closer to home reminded me that I would have to act as if nothing had happened. I would have to smile at Jessica, talk about flowers and invitations, pretend I was excited about the wedding, all while knowing the horrible truth about who she really was. Michael picked me up at the airport that night, and the moment I saw him, my heart broke a little more. He looked tired, thinner than I remembered, and there was something in his eyes I hadn't noticed before. A subtle sadness, as if something inside him was slowly being extinguished. "Hello, Mum," he said, hugging me. "How was your visit with Aunt Carol?" "Fine, son. She sends her regards. The lie burned my throat, but I needed time to process everything before implementing our plan. On the way home, Michael told me about the wedding preparations they had made during the weekend, but I noticed something strange about the way he spoke. It sounded as if he were reciting a list of completed tasks instead of emotionally sharing about his upcoming wedding. Jessica and I chose the final menu for the reception, he told me, but his voice was flat, emotionless. What did you choose? What she wanted, a pause. I mean, what we decided together. Jessica has very good taste for these things. There was that automatic correction again, as if he had learned to censor his own thoughts. And what did you want? Michael looked at me quickly, as if the question had surprised him. Me? No, it doesn't matter what I wanted. The important thing is that Jessica is happy with the decisions. My heart sank. My son, who had always been decisive and had strong opinions about everything, now spoke as if his own preferences were irrelevant. That night, after Michael left for his apartment, I sat in my kitchen with a cup of tea, trying to process everything I had learned. I took out my phone and checked the messages. There were 3 from Jessica. The first said, "Hello, Deborah. I hope you had a wonderful trip. Can we have lunch tomorrow? I have some exciting ideas for the wedding." The second, "Michael told me you were back. I'm so excited to see you." The third, sent only an hour earlier, "Is everything okay? Michael says you seemed a little distant at the airport." Even through the text messages, I could feel the way Jessica was monitoring the situation, analyzing each change in the behavior of the people around her. Brian was right. She was extremely intelligent and manipulative. I told her I had been tired from the trip, but that I would love to have lunch with her the next day. Lunch was one of the most difficult experiences of my life. Sitting in front of Jessica in our favorite restaurant, seeing her smile and speak cheerfully about centerpieces and music for the wedding, knowing everything she had done to other men, it was like having lunch with a wolf in sheep's clothing. "Deborah, you have to tell me all about your sister," said Jessica, cutting her salad with precise movements. "Michael told me she lives in a very beautiful part of Wisconsin." "Yes, Madison is beautiful," I responded, observing her face carefully for any reaction to the city's name. "I've never been to that area," she said, and it would have sounded casual to anyone who didn't know her parents lived only an hour from there. "How long has she lived there?" "About 15 years. "How interesting. And what does she do?" It was strange how Jessica could make a casual conversation feel like an interrogation. Each question seemed designed to obtain specific information, although I wasn't sure what she would use it for. "She works in an elementary school," I replied. "She's a third-grade teacher." "How noble. I've always admired people who work with children." She smiled, but the smile didn't reach her eyes. "It must be difficult, right? Being away from family." "Sometimes. But I understand that people need to live their own lives, make their own decisions." Jessica tensed, almost imperceptibly. "Of course, although I believe family should be the most important thing. Don't you think? Michael and I have talked a lot about the importance of putting the nuclear family first." "Nuclear family?" "Well, once we get married, we will be Michael's primary family. Everything else, although important, will be secondary." The way she said it, with that sweet but firm smile, chilled my blood. She was basically telling me I was going to be relegated to a secondary role in my son's life. "I understand," I said calmly. "I suppose that means you will be spending less time with both families after the wedding." "Well, not with both families," Jessica replied. "As I already told you, my parents and I don't have a relationship. But I do think it's important that Michael and I establish our own traditions, our own space." "And what does Michael think about that?" "He's completely on board. In fact, it was his idea. He says he's ready to be independent, to be a married man instead of a mama's boy. The words hurt like a slap, not because they were cruel, but because I knew they were lies wrapped in half-truths. Yes, Michael needed to be independent, but the way Jessica was saying it sounded like she had planted those ideas in his head. I'm very glad Michael feels ready for that step, I said, keeping my voice neutral. Oh yes, it's been incredible to see how he has matured since we started dating. Before, he was very dependent on the opinions of others, especially family. Now he's much more sure of himself, more decisive. Another lie. My son had always been sure of himself and decisive. If anything, I had noticed lately that he seemed less sure, more anxious for approval. That's wonderful, I said. Although I hope that independence doesn't mean we won't see you much after the wedding. Jessica put down her fork and looked at me directly. For a second, her mask slipped slightly, and I could see something cold and uncompromising in her eyes. Of course you'll see us, she said, but her tone had subtly changed. But like any healthy married couple, our marriage will have to be our main priority. I'm sure you understand that. Absolutely, I replied. And are you talking about having children soon? The question seemed to catch her off guard. She recovered quickly, but not before I noticed a strange expression cross her face. Eventually. But we want to enjoy our first few years of marriage just being the two of us. We have many plans, many trips we want to take. Trips? Michael has always wanted to travel more. Me too. We're thinking about taking a sabbatical year after the honeymoon to travel through Europe. My heart stopped. Michael had never mentioned a sabbatical, and with his dental practice, taking a whole year off would be practically impossible financially. A whole year? Well, that will depend on the circumstances. Michael is considering selling his share of the dental practice to his partner. He says he's tired of being tied to one place, that he wants more freedom. This was completely new to me. Michael loved his work. He loved the practice he had built with so much effort. The idea that he would want to sell it made no sense. When did he decide that? He's been thinking about it for months. I've been supporting him, helping him see that there's more to life than work. It was the exact same pattern Brian had described. Jessica was convincing Michael to abandon the things he loved, the things that gave him stability and identity, under the guise of helping him find freedom. That's unexpected, I said. Men sometimes need women to help them dream bigger, Jessica replied with a smile that now seemed completely sinister to me. Michael had a very limited mindset before. Now he's starting to see all the possibilities life has to offer. We finished lunch with her talking animatedly about the travel plans they had, plans she had clearly made without really consulting Michael about their practical or financial feasibility. When I returned home, I immediately called Brian. It's already started, I told him without preamble. She's doing exactly what you said she would do. She's isolating him from me. She's convincing him to sell his practice. She's filling his head with plans that aren't realistic. How advanced is the process? I don't know. But Brian, my son doesn't seem like himself anymore. He talks differently. He acts differently. It's as if... I stopped, swallowing the lump in my throat. As if what? As if he's not my son anymore. Brian sighed deeply. Then we don't have time to lose. Are you ready to implement our plan? I looked out the window at the house where my son had grown up, where we had been happy for so many years before Jessica came into our lives. Yes, I said. I'm ready. The plan we had developed with Brian required perfect timing and careful coordination. The idea was to create a situation where Jessica would feel threatened enough to show her true character, but in an environment where Michael could see it, without it looking like we had orchestrated the whole scenario. Brian had flown back to Minneapolis, but not before giving me his direct number and assuring me he would be available 24 hours a day for the next week. Patricia and Robert were also on standby, ready to provide any support we needed. On Wednesday morning, 1 week before the wedding, I put the plan into action. I called Michael early before he went to work. "Son, I need to talk to you about something important. Can you come for lunch today? And bring Jessica, please." "Is everything okay, Mum? You sound worried." "It's okay, but it's something I need to discuss with both of you in person." Michael arrived at my house at noon with Jessica. She looked particularly beautiful that day, dressed in a light blue dress that enhanced her green eyes. But I already knew how to see past that perfect facade. I could see the tension in her shoulders, the way her eyes constantly scanned my face for clues about what I was going to say. "Deborah," she greeted me with her usual smile. "Michael told me you wanted to talk to us about something important." "Yes, please. Sit down." I led them to the living room, where I had prepared coffee and some snacks. "There's something I need to tell you." Michael sat on the sofa, but I noticed Jessica chose a chair where she could see both Michael and me clearly, always positioning herself strategically. "What is it, Mum?" I took a deep breath, remembering exactly what we had rehearsed. The key was to present the information in a way that sounded like I had just discovered it by chance. When I was in Wisconsin last weekend, my sister Carol told me something that has me very worried. Jessica tensed, almost imperceptibly. "What did she tell you?" "It turns out her neighbor is a social worker, and they've been talking about different cases she has handled over the years. Carol mentioned you two were getting married, and her neighbor asked for the bride's last name." Michael frowned. Why would a stranger care about Jessica's last name? That's exactly what I wondered. But it turns out that when Carol said Collins, this woman got very serious. She asked if by any chance the bride was from Minneapolis. The color drained completely from Jessica's face. Her hands, which had been resting calmly in her lap, were now clenched into fists. "And what did she say?" Michael asked, obviously confused by the direction the conversation was taking. "She said she didn't know where Jessica was from, but she would ask. And then this social worker told her something that has me very worried." Jessica cleared her throat. "Deborah, I don't know where this is going, but she told me," I continued, looking directly at Jessica, "about a case she had handled a few years ago. A young man who had to be hospitalized for a suicide attempt 3 days before his wedding." The silence that followed was so thick I could feel it pressing against my ears. Michael looked completely lost, but Jessica looked like a cornered animal. "Mum, what does that have to do with us?" Michael asked. "The man's name was Brian Peterson, and he was going to marry a woman named Jessica Collins." Michael turned to Jessica so quickly I thought he would hurt his neck. "Jessica." I don't know what your mother is talking about," Jessica said, but her voice was trembling. "It must be someone else with the same name." "Is it someone else with the same name?" I asked directly. "Or is there something you haven't told us about your past?" Jessica stood up abruptly. "I'm not going to sit here while you accuse me of things I didn't do." "No one is accusing you," Michael said, but his voice sounded less certain than usual. "Mum is just asking." "Your mother is trying to sabotage our wedding," Jessica shouted. And there it was. The mask had finally fallen. "Ever since she met me, she's been looking for ways to break us up." Michael stood up too, clearly shocked by Jessica's emotional outburst. "Jessica, calm down. We can just talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. Your mother is making up stories, trying to make you doubt me a week before our wedding." I remained seated, watching the situation unfold exactly as Brian had predicted. When Jessica felt threatened, her behavior became erratic and aggressive. "Jessica," I said calmly, "if this is a misunderstanding, we can clear it up easily. Just tell me the truth about Brian Peterson." "I don't know any Brian Peterson," she screamed, but her eyes told me something completely different. Michael approached her, trying to put his hands on her shoulders to calm her, but she recoiled sharply. "Don't touch me. This is exactly what she wanted to happen." "What did she want to happen?" Michael asked, genuinely confused. "For me to react like this, to look like the crazy one. Your mother has been planning this." The paranoia in her voice was evident now, and I could see in Michael's eyes that he was starting to notice things he hadn't seen before. "Jessica, no one is trying to make you look crazy," Michael said softly. "Just sit down and let's talk about this." "No, I've heard enough." She headed for the door, but stopped and turned back to me. What I saw in her eyes in that moment chilled my blood. It was pure malice, without any trace of the sweetness she usually showed. "You think you've won, don't you?" she said, her voice low and threatening. "You think you can destroy what Michael and I have?" "Jessica, I'm not trying to destroy anything," I responded honestly. "I'm just trying to understand." "Liar!" The scream was so violent that Michael instinctively took a step back. "You've been jealous of me since day one. You can't stand that your son loves me more than he loves you." Michael looked completely shell-shocked. "Jessica, please lower your voice. The neighbors will—" "I don't give a damn about the neighbors," she yelled. "And I don't give a damn about you either if you're going to let your mother treat me like this." There it was, the words that would reveal everything. Michael stood completely still, processing what he had just heard. "What did you just say?" Michael asked, his voice barely audible. Jessica immediately realized what she had said. She tried to backtrack, but it was too late. "No, I didn't mean that. I'm upset. I'm not thinking clearly." "You said you didn't give a damn if you lost me over this," Michael said, his voice growing stronger. "Is that how you really feel?" "Michael, my love, of course I care about you. More than anything in the world. I'm just so stressed out by all of this." "No," Michael said, shaking his head. "No, this isn't stress. This is something else." Jessica moved toward him, trying to take his hands, but he pulled them away. "Michael, please, your mother is trying to manipulate you." "You know what?" Michael said, his voice becoming clearer with each word. "I think I need to know the truth about Brian Peterson." The panic in Jessica's eyes was now completely visible. "Michael, there's nothing to know. Your mother is making it up." "Then you won't have a problem with me looking into it myself." "You can't do that." The desperation in her voice confirmed everything we needed to know. Michael turned to me. "Mum, do you have the number for Aunt Carol's social worker friend?" "Yes," I replied, taking out my phone. "In fact, she gave me Brian Peterson's number directly. She said he would be willing to talk to you if you wanted." Jessica lunged for my phone, trying to snatch it from my hands. "You can't do this. You have no right." Michael grabbed her by the arm, stopping her. "Jessica, what is going on? Why are you acting like this?" She turned to him, and for a moment I saw something in her eyes that deeply frightened me. It was a rage so intense, so pure, that I feared for my son's physical safety. "Because your mother is a manipulative witch who can't stand the idea of you ever having a family of your own," Jessica seethed. "And you're too stupid to realize it." Michael dropped her arm as if he'd been burned. I had never in my life seen my son so shocked. "Did you just call me stupid?" Jessica realized she had crossed a line she couldn't come back from. She tried desperately to retreat. "Michael, my love, I didn't—" "Get out of my house," Michael said, his voice quiet but firm. "What?" Get out of my mother's house. Now. Michael, please. We can talk about this. No, we can't. I need to think. I need space. I need time to understand what the hell just happened here. Jessica looked at me one last time, and the expression on her face was one of pure hatred. This isn't over, she said in a low voice, just quiet enough for Michael not to hear clearly. Yes, I replied just as quietly. I think it is. Jessica stormed out of my house, slamming the door so hard the window frames rattled. Michael collapsed onto the sofa, his head in his hands. Mum, he said without looking up, I think I need that phone number. Michael spoke with Brian that same afternoon. The conversation lasted 2.5 hours, and when it was over, my son was no longer the same man who had been living under Jessica's spell for the last 8 months. Mum, he said to me when he hung up the phone, his voice broken. How did I not see it? How could I have been so blind? He was sitting on my sofa, the same position he'd been in for the whole call, but now he looked as if he had aged years in a matter of hours. Son, don't blame yourself. Brian explained to me how psychological manipulation works. It's gradual, subtle. The people who do it are experts at making their victims feel guilty for doubting. But the signs were there, weren't they? Everything Brian told me about the isolation, about making me doubt my own perceptions, Jessica has been doing exactly that. I sat next to him, taking his hand in mine. What are you going to do? Michael sighed deeply, looking toward the window where the October sun was beginning to set. I'm going to cancel the wedding. The words came out of his mouth with a determination I hadn't heard in months. My son was back. Are you sure? Completely. Brian helped me understand things I had been feeling but couldn't explain. The way I felt anxious every time I had to make a decision, like I was walking through a minefield. The way I had started to doubt my own instincts about people, about situations. And what are you going to tell Jessica? The truth, that I know about Brian, about the other men, that I know what she really is. That night, Michael called Jessica and asked her to come to his apartment the next day to talk. He didn't tell her over the phone what he had discovered, but from the tone of his voice, I'm sure she knew something had fundamentally changed. The next morning, Michael called me before his meeting with Jessica. Mum, can you stay by your phone, just in case? Of course, son. Are you worried? Brian warned me that when Jessica realizes she's lost control completely, she could become unpredictable. Do you want me to be there? No. This is something I need to do alone. But I want to know I can call you if things get bad. I'll be here. Michael never had to call me, but his downstairs neighbor did. Mrs. Miller, this is Tom, Michael's neighbor. There's a woman in your son's apartment who is screaming very loudly. Is everything okay? Can you hear what she's saying? Something about ruining his life, about revenge. Mrs. Miller, she sounds really unhinged. Have you seen Michael? Is he okay? I saw him a few minutes ago on the balcony. He looked okay, but worried. Can you do me a favor? Can you knock on the door and ask Michael if he needs help? Of course. 5 minutes later, Tom called me back. Michael says he's fine, but that the woman is leaving soon. He also asked me to tell you that everything went as expected. Jessica left Michael's apartment an hour later, but not before threatening to ruin his professional reputation and tell everyone what kind of man he really was. Empty threats from someone who had just lost all her power. Michael came to my house that night. He looked exhausted but free, as if a huge weight had been lifted from his shoulders. How did it go? I asked him. Horrible, but necessary. He sat at the kitchen table where we had shared so many conversations over the years. She denied everything at first, of course, but when I told her I had spoken with Brian directly, when I told her specific details that only she could know, she fell apart. Did she admit what she had done? Not exactly, but her reaction was confession enough. She became vicious. She told me things I never thought I would hear from someone who supposedly loved me. What kind of things? Michael hesitated as if it pained him to remember. She told me I had been the easiest of all her fiancés, that I had been pathetically easy to manipulate, because I was desperately needy for female approval. The words hurt me. I can't imagine how Michael felt hearing them. She also said my mother was a bitter old woman who couldn't stand to see her son happy, and that I was too weak to defend her from you. Michael. No, Mum. Let me finish. She said she had wasted 8 months of her life with me, that she could have found someone much better in that time, someone with more money, more status, less family baggage. How did you respond? I thanked her. You thanked her? I said thank you for finally showing me who you really are, and I'm glad I found out before I married you instead of after. What did she say to that? She screamed for about 20 more minutes, but eventually she realized she wasn't going to change my mind. In the end, she took all her things from my apartment and told me she was going to make sure I regretted this decision for the rest of my life. Are you worried about those threats? Michael smiled for the first time in months, a genuine smile that reached his eyes. No, because Brian explained to me that threats are the last thing they have left when they lose control. He said Jessica would probably make a lot of noise for a while, but eventually she would move on to find her next victim. And that was exactly what happened. For the next 2 weeks, Jessica bombarded Michael with text messages, voicemails, and emails. She alternated between begging him to forgive her and threatening him with various forms of revenge. Michael changed his phone number, blocked her social media accounts, and asked his secretary at the dental practice not to put through any calls from her. After that, silence. A month later, we heard through a mutual acquaintance that Jessica had started dating a successful lawyer from a neighboring city. The pattern was starting all over again with a new victim. That night, when Michael told me about Jessica's new boyfriend, he asked me something that broke my heart. Mum, should we warn him? Should we try to contact that man and tell him what we know? It was an impossible question. On one hand, we knew another good man was about to go through the same hell Michael had narrowly avoided. On the other hand, who would believe us? How could we explain the situation without sounding like a vengeful ex-mother-in-law and a bitter ex-fiancé? I don't know, son. What do you think? I think if someone had come to me a year ago, telling me stories about Jessica, I probably wouldn't have believed them. I probably would have thought they had ulterior motives. You're probably right, but I also think that if there's a way to plant a seed of doubt, to make that man ask the right questions or look for the right signs. In the end, we decided to write an anonymous letter to Jessica's new boyfriend. We didn't include specific accusations or detailed stories. We simply suggested that he research his girlfriend's past, especially any serious previous relationships she might have had. We gave him the names of Brian, Mark, James, and David, without explaining why those names might be relevant. We don't know if the letter made any difference, but 6 months later, that same mutual acquaintance told us that Jessica and the lawyer had broken up, and that he had been the one to end the relationship. A year after the wedding that never happened, Michael started dating Sarah, a nurse he met when she brought her grandmother to his dental practice. The difference between his relationship with Sarah and his relationship with Jessica was like night and day. Sarah was genuinely sweet, but also strong and independent. She had her own friends, her own interests, her own life. When she came to my house for dinner, she asked real questions about me. She was interested in the stories I had to tell. She didn't see Michael's family as competition for his attention, but as a group of people she could come to love too. Michael flourished with Sarah in a way he had never flourished with Jessica. He was more relaxed, more himself, more willing to make decisions without asking for permission or constant approval. 2 years after the debacle with Jessica, Michael and Sarah got engaged. When they told me, Michael looked me straight in the eye and said something I will never forget. "Mum, I want you to know that if you ever have doubts about Sarah, if you ever feel that something isn't right, I want you to tell me immediately. I've learned to trust your instinct as much as my own." The wedding of Michael and Sarah was held in my backyard, with 50 people who genuinely loved them both. Sarah's parents were there, smiling and crying tears of joy as they watched their daughter marry a man who obviously adored her. Patricia and Robert Collins came too, having developed a friendship with me over the months following our first meeting. Brian and his wife were also present, and seeing Brian happy and healthy was one of the best parts of the whole experience. During his speech at the reception, Michael spoke about the lessons he had learned about love, about trust, and about the importance of the people who truly care about your well-being. "I've learned," he said, looking directly at me, "that true love never asks you to abandon the people who have loved you your whole life. True love adds to your family. It doesn't replace it." That night, while I was cleaning up after the party, I found a note that Sarah had left in my kitchen. "Deborah," it said, "thank you for raising such a wonderful man, and thank you for protecting him when he needed it most. I hope I can be half as good a mother as you have been. With love and gratitude, Sarah." I sat in my kitchen, the same kitchen where I had had so many difficult conversations with Michael during the dark months with Jessica, and I cried. But this time, they were tears of relief, of gratitude, of peace. My son was safe, he was happy, and he finally understood the difference between the love that lifts you up and the love that destroys you. Jessica never contacted us again. According to the last news we had of her, she had moved to another state and had started using a different last name. We hope she has found help, but more than that, we hope she has found no more victims. As for us, we live in peace. Michael and Sarah now have 2 beautiful children, and I am the happiest grandmother in the world. When I look at my grandchildren, I think of all the joys Jessica would have stolen from our lives if she had achieved her goal. Sometimes, mothers have to make difficult decisions to protect their children. Sometimes, those decisions make us look like the villains of the story. But when I see my son happy, when I see my daughter-in-law treat him with the respect and love he deserves, when I see my grandchildren growing up in a home full of genuine love, I know I made the right decision. I trusted my maternal instinct, and that instinct saved my son from a fate that could have been devastating. And in the end, that's the only thing that matters.